Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you to our author chat, the Country Bookshop's author chat with Heather Frese for her book, The Baddest Girl on the Planet. Before we begin our conversation, I would like to begin by telling you a bit about the Country Bookshop in Southern Pines, North Carolina. We are unique in that we are a bookstore that is part of a small community twice weekly, award-winning newspaper called The Pilot. We are a general bookstore for kids and adults that is part of a community that chooses to shop with us and share their stories and lives with us and celebrate the people who take a bit of history and place in themselves and carve it out on the page and give us this fantastic novel like Heather has done today with The Baddest Girl on the Planet. Heather Frese wrote this book. It is the winner of the Lee Smith Novel Prize and Our State Magazine's Editor's Choice book, and was recently longlisted for the 2021 Center for Fiction First Novel Prize. I'm going to really quickly put a link for you to buy this book in our chat, and really, not to the panelists, to everyone. And also, as the talk goes on, if you have questions, just put them in the Q&A and we will get to them at the end. For the many of you who choose to watch this video in the future and choose to purchase this book, which you should, please consider buying it from us at the Country Bookshop. Heather has published numerous short stories, essays, and the occasional poem. Her work has appeared in Michigan Quarterly Review, the Los Angeles Review, Front Porch, the Barely South Review, Switchback, and elsewhere. She's earned notable mention in the Pushcart Prize Anthology and Best American Essays. Heather received her MFA from West Virginia University and has a master's degree from Ohio University. Coastal North Carolina is her longtime love and source of inspiration, her writing deeply influenced by the wild magic and history of the Outer Banks. As a native Ohioan, she currently writes and wrangles 3 small children in Raleigh, North Carolina. So welcome, Heather. Thank you for chatting with us.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here, and I can't wait to come see the bookshop in person because it's
me either.
The world starts opening up again.
Opening and closing, I feel like it's going to be
closing. That's
the way it is for a while. But I do want to start by announcing that the deadline for the Lee Smith Novel Prize is midnight on September 1st. And I want to open up by asking you about that. Like, when did you submit to the Lee Smith Novel Prize? What was that like? How did you find out about it? What did the book like then? Like, just tell me everything about that entry, please.
Well, it's sort of funny because Lee Smith had always been like this idol of mine, like my sort of heroine. And whenever like you get asked a lot, like what tradition are you writing in? And like, when you're studying creative writing, and I would always say, well, I'm kind of writing in the tradition of Lee Smith, her sort of focuses on place and voice, and I feel like her writing is literary and also really funny and accessible, and that's exactly what I was trying to go for. So I would always say, Lee Smith. So when I was looking for places to submit the manuscript, I saw the Lee Smith Novel Prize, and I was like, well, that ought to be a good fit, right? So I sent that in, and it's been a good few years now. We had to get we had some COVID related delays. Couple times, I think. So it was several years ago. And then of course they have to, read everything and judge it and announce things. And then you go through editing and stuff. So it's been a while. Like I was, I think my littlest baby was an actual tiny baby when I submitted, and he's 3 now. So but yeah, it was, the prize itself was like, it sounded like, like such a good fit for the book. And I was like, well, if that doesn't fit, I don't know what will. So let's go for that one.
I love that the Lee Smith Novel Prize is the entry into it, because you're right. It is such a nice echo and such a nice of that specific North Carolina place voice canon that Lee Smith really just nails.
Right.
I'm scrolling down a little bit because the other thing, in the way your words kind of lend so much to, well, your words are the whole book, but I just wanted to highlight a few that really popped up in like the most interesting moments. You have a quote that says, "There's one tree with roots that grab onto the water like claws." And I don't know the name of that tree, but I know exactly what tree you're talking about. I loved your concept of a grief bubble. Talking about Nate and Jeannie, they latch like puzzle rings. And I'm going to ask you a question after this one, but the way you described the preacher, I felt like I was in the pew letting my mind wander. And I'm going to read you these two quotes. The preacher, Dr. John, thinks it sounds extra holy to over enunciate the word Lord so that it sounds like Lord. I know he's quoting the Bible because he uses his special Bible quoting voice, soft and precise. I wanted to ask specifically that, like, as you're writing, how did this book take form before it went for submission? Was it writing in fits and starts? Are you scribbling that down in the pew, or how did you build this book?
Yeah, both. Definitely fits and starts, and I definitely had stuff that I would scribble down along the way, thinking that it would be used at some point in some project, like because it's just something's too good to pass up. But it started as I just wanted to tell this little story of how Evie got divorced. Like, I knew she was married to Stephen. I knew it was not a good marriage, and I knew she was going to end it at some point. And so that's what I wanted to write about first. And that's what I thought I was doing. I thought I was just going to tell this little story about Evie and how she came to this realization that she wasn't going to stay with this guy who wasn't the right guy for her. And so I wrote that one. And that's actually how Mike Tyson got introduced to it too, because my friend had told me this story about that was the thing I scribbled down. A friend of mine told me a story about how she knew Mike Tyson when she was little, and I was like, "What are you talking about? You knew Mike Tyson when you were a little girl?" She's like, "Yep, just Don King happened to have this training camp in Ohio where she lived, and he would train Mike Tyson, and he would watch them, and like they thought he was this wonderful, sports star who was paying attention to them and this great guy, and then of course he has this downfall, and she took that to heart because like she kind of idolized him, and he was this this big sports star being kind to her. And then I started thinking, like, what if that had happened to Evie? Like, what if that had been something that happened to Evie and she carries it back to Hatteras? And of course that's not something that happens every day, so she would be like kind of a rock star that she got to meet Mike Tyson. But then when he starts his downfall, like that's also like kids aren't going to forget that either, because that's just it was something unusual, and like they're going to latch onto that. So like those things, like the story of Evie's divorce and the story of Mike Tyson, kind of started it off for me. And then I had some other things that happened, and I was like, oh, I'm going to write a story about this. And then I was like, one of my friends said, well, like, what if that happened to Evie? And I was like, well, that would be really funny if that happened to Evie. And so I made it happen to Evie. And while I was writing that, like I realized that Aunt Faye had died, and I was like, oh, well, now I have to write about that because Aunt Faye died. That's super important. So at that point I had 3 what I just thought were little stories, but I was like, oh, these are chapters, like this is a bigger project. So from that point on, I was writing in Evie's voice and telling her story, and realized that that's what I wanted to do. And so at that point, I began looking at things like, okay, this is a book project, this is a novel. How do I want to tell it? And how do I want to like stitch things together? And like, what story did I want to tell? And I wanted to tell her coming of age story, but I didn't want to end it, at 18 or 20. I wanted her to come of age into her 30s, like coming of age into your adulthood, like, because people, you don't stop, like what coming of age stories stop when you're, 18, 19, but we don't really start to get the hang of it in our 30s, I think.
I love hearing how you built like the Mike Tyson, because so much of the book is about it gives the reader such an opportunity to think about how others' perception of us or others' thinking of us determines kind of how we think of ourselves. And it's, in terms of having this book for a book club or as people read it, I think that is the most interesting opportunity for conversation around the book, the way you set that up. This is like later in my notes, and so I'm going to misquote it because I can't find it right now, but it's from her essay to the first school from the boyfriend's mom, but it's like, you don't know you're bad till someone tells you you're bad. Mm-hmm. And I love that comes later in the book, but I love that thinking, and I love the kind of through line with Mike Tyson and her wrapping it up in that. And can you talk a little bit to this concept of bad and Evie being bad and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that line is key. Like you don't know you're bad until someone tells you. Like you just want things to be interesting. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of this sort of this concept of like a bad reputation and what connotes a bad reputation, and it's different for what's a bad reputation for a girl than it is for a boy, and it's not fair and it's not right. But these are the things that like Evie like at first doesn't realize and just sort of sticks herself right into the middle of, and then sort of comes as she's growing and growing up and kind of figuring things out. I think she realizes the role that the way others perceive you plays in it, and also how she plays into it, how maybe even she buys into people thinking she's bad, because she's not bad. She's not bad at all. She's human and she makes mistakes and sometimes poor choices, but don't we all? But yeah, the idea of sort of rubbing up against that notion of what other people think and coming to form the opinion about yourself by yourself, and also finding her role within that community, because it is also, I think what impacts it a lot is that it's this really small, tight-knit community that's literally like it's on an island, like literally in the middle of the ocean. Like it's small, it's tiny, and it's everybody, it's like one big family almost. Like everyone participates in each other's lives and everybody knows everybody. And so having that, like it's not a place that will let her forget other people's views of her. So I think that made it harder, made it more difficult for her to sort of figure it out on her own.
I also think, and this goes back to the power of her voice, and you know, voice being such a purpose for you, is even as I was reading it and realizing how she's internalized these other viewpoints, I'm also like watching her go through life, and I'm like, nobody even thinks she's bad, really. It's her thinking, and it gives such a moment of reflection for the reader, because you really see that juxtaposition between, do people really think she's bad, or does she think she's bad? Mm-hmm. And I love that opportunity. And I love, in my mind too, the Walter, the dog, who is a bad dog, but the way Evie treats him, and ultimately the way Daniel treats him, I saw him as like, I don't know, if someone were writing like an essay about this, it would be kind of fun to pull Bad, Evie, Walter, like all out of the box and really examine all of that, and Mike Tyson, and really pull it all together. You've given such through lines of that. But the other thing that I love that you pepper through is all the Irish lady pirates, and then Taffy of Torpedo Junction.
Oh, Taffy.
I love Taffy of Torpedo Junction.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, can you talk a little, maybe explain for our audience who might not be familiar with Taffy of Torpedo Junction what that is, and then we can.
Yeah, definitely. So Taffy of Torpedo Junction was like my favorite book when I was a child, because I grew up in Ohio, and every summer we would go down to Hatteras and we'll camp at the National Seashore Campground. And it was just like the best time of my life. So Taffy of Torpedo Junction is a book. It's a kid's novel set during World War II on Hatteras Island, and it's Taffy, the little girl, and she has a pony, and she rescues a dog out of the ocean, and she and her friends end up defeating some Nazis. It's just wonderful. Like, it was the first book that I read. Like, I finished it, I closed it, I opened it up and started reading it again. Noteworthy is that it is published by Blair. John F. Blair was the publisher. I know that because I read it so many times. So like that was another thing. I was like, oh, wouldn't that be something? So yeah, Taffy of Torpedo Junction. Read it now. Read it. I'm ready to go read it again. It's so good.
Read it as an adult. Read it as a child, and it also it was written by a school teacher on the
Yeah.
Outer Banks as well. And what I love about it is it gives such, when I sell it to adults, it gives such context of what World War II was like on the Outer Banks, because people had, I mean, it's really real. And if you talk to any resident there, that's a story that Taffy of Torpedo Junction allows to leave the island. But other than that, it's really like a experience that's only known there.
Yeah, they were right out there on the edge with the ships exploding and having to black out their curtains because so that they didn't get torpedoed. Like, yeah, it was something. And I learned so much from those books, and also all the like Tales of the Outer Banks, shipwrecks and pirates novels and the stories. I loved those books when I was a kid. So yeah, I had to put Taffy in there, and I had to put the Irish pirate queens, and had to weave those in as much history as I could.
Well, I like how it peppers through and shows up in different places. And I felt like Aunt Faye, who is one of my favorite characters, is like a real life Irish lady pirate, you know, and can you talk about Aunt Faye and where she came from and how she functions in the book?
Yeah. Aunt Faye was so much fun. She's one of my favorite characters to write too. So Aunt Faye is Evie's dad's sister, his older sister. And in my mind, I don't know that I actually put this in the book itself, but in my mind, Aunt Faye kind of almost raised him, Evie's dad. Maybe I did. I might have had a line about that.
Yeah, I think it's like
it's a
it
little
feels that way as the reader.
Yeah. good, because that's how she is in my imagination. She's sort of as a mother figure for Evie's dad, and then as Evie's family, her immediate family, her mom and dad are having some problems when she's a girl. Aunt Faye steps in and kind of takes care of the kids for that summer. And I think Aunt Faye and Evie have this really close, like kindred spirit relationship. Like I think Aunt Faye gets her in a way that sometimes Evie's mom might not, and kind of gives Evie what she needs, whether that's, tough love or going along with what Evie needs in the moment to sort of
she's never judged. She's never judged. And I love that about Aunt Faye, because I love that Evie had somebody in her life who, like, even through Evie's lens, she had somebody there who was like really never ever gonna judge.
Yeah, there's that sort of source of steadfast, constant support who is always going to be there and stick up for you and have your side. Like that was Aunt Faye for Evie. And that's why when like I was riding along and I found out that she died, I was like, oh no, poor Evie. Like that's going to be real hard on her. Like, that's going to be bad.
Well, I love the way you wrote that. And one of the things, and I think this is part of what contributes to what makes this such a special book, is the way each chapter has such a different feel. And it's what makes, and we'll talk about Blair in a second, but it's what makes this book so special and so different from any other book, is that I think of the chapters in my mind as like the Dear Abby chapter and the quiz chapter and the lobster chapter. And the funeral chapter is the one you name as like the book of funeral etiquette, I think. The book of funeral etiquette. And I really love how that's written, because it feels like you're in a lens of fog. It feels like you're at that funeral and dealing with those emotions. I think I mentioned earlier the bubble of grief that wells up, because that's that's just so well written. And can you talk about that chapter in particular, how you wrote it, and then can we talk about some of the other chapters, and were you conscious about, I mean, obviously you were conscious about the chapters forming that way, but how interesting that makes it as a whole when you view the book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I was writing, so as I started off, like it was just Evie's voice that captured me, the first person narrative of her voice. Like her voice is what kind of drove things. And then as I was writing, I was kind of just playing for some points. Like I wanted to do the things that I loved to read the most. Like I love epistolary novels. I love like when things take a different shape. I love second person and second person in Evie's voice. And so I wanted to try that and sort of like trying and seeing what happened. And when it was working, I was like, well, just kind of kept going with it and figuring out a way to I envisioned it as kind of like this, like a puzzle almost that would latch together in the different forms, the different points of view, the different phases in Evie's life, and like at the end, like I wanted you to find out a little bit more, a little backstory at some point, but I wanted to play all the different formats and the different sort of ways that her voice could inhabit these forms. So that's sort of how I got to those points. For the funeral chapter, it was the book, the book of etiquette. Like that's what kind of, it was the form for that one that started me, that gave, because I had the idea, like I needed to write about Aunt Faye, but it was the form of it being a coffee table book, like a book you would put out. Here's a book of etiquette about how you behave during a funeral, and it was like that lens that kind of shaped it for me. And from then on, the story, like the events themselves, kind of took shape.
Have you been to a lot of funerals as you were writing those, and like coming up with what Evie writes in the book of etiquette?
I think it had been a while since I had been to a funeral, thank goodness. But I just remembered stuff. And then like I always have these like random Google tabs open up on my on my computer, like sample funeral sermons, and trying to remember how calling hours work. Like, is there one set or is there two sets? And like stuff like that. Cause I don't know, I try to get that stuff accurate. It's just a personal a personal thing of mine. Like that's the stuff I like to get right. Like, cause it'll bug me if I don't.
I also think it was a great, you've mentioned a lot of times about the community of the island, and how that shaped Evie and her how essential how that's part of the whole thing. And I love how the funeral was a way to just showcase the broader community and the personalities that come in. Now I know you're an Ohioan and you love the Outer Banks, but can you talk about how the Outer Banks has inspired you, or your trips there, or different people in the community who you might have observed, or through the course of researching and living and writing this book?
Yeah, we did. Like I said, I would spend every summer there, 2 weeks every summer. And then as I got older, we would go at different times in the year. And then I ended up moving down for a year after we got married, 2012. So we lived there. We lived on the island for a year and worked there, and I worked at the bookstore and worked at the inn. So the inn, yeah, I worked at the inn where I had actually I'd already written most of the book at that point. So at that point it was like, well, what did I get right and what did I get wrong? I fictionalized the inn a bit, but so the idea of the inn was fascinating to me, because it's sort of this in between space where people come and go, but the idea of being the girl who lives there, and the like her parents owning it, and like that's your home, that these other people view as this sort of temporary coming and going space. And in that way, like the whole island is kind of like that, where as just a kid coming down, like you come down for 2 weeks and it's just this wonderful magical place, and then you leave and you go back to your like real life. It's different when you live there for real, and like that is your real life, and that's where you go to the mailbox, and that's where you go to the grocery store, and that's where all your problems happen, and all your your troubles don't go away just because you're in this beautiful picturesque scenic island. So I started to think at one point, even before I lived there, I started to think about like what would it have really been like to grow up there? What would it really be like to be there, every winter when, the road washes out and the storms come and you have to evacuate and school closes for hurricanes? And like, what would it really be like to have all those factors playing into your life growing up? And like, that's kind of what started like me imagining what Evie's life would have been like. And so I wrote most of it before we lived there, but then I was able to check and see what I got right and what needed help.
I have a book for you listening to this, and I met your daughter briefly before we came on. It's called Madame Badobea. Have you heard of it?
No.
It's beautifully illustrated. It's kind of long form picture book fiction, but it's one that I think could be for an adult or a kid. And it's about this little girl named Mabel who lives in the Mermaid Inn. Her parents run it. It's a bed and breakfast. And it's the story of the most interesting guest who she decides is a villain, and she starts spying on her, and then they become friends and have these imaginary hangouts and are pirates together and then mermaids. And it is so right up your alley, especially thinking about like really considering what it is to live there, because she goes into it, she gets to sleep in the room and the guests are there, and it's I think you need to read it to your daughter. But I love hearing you talk about tourism, because the way let's talk tourists a little bit, because I love how you illustrate, you use the word in her younger self and in her understanding evolves, but the word kin as a specific dividing line between the tourists and the locals.
I think there's such a distinction that I discovered, in which, again, when you're a child, you don't really realize it's just kind of is what it is. But like growing up, you sort of realize the distinction of especially on Hatteras, like you have the tourists who come in, and the tourists can be kind of jerks sometimes. Like they can be really not nice people, and they can be mean to the people who live there, and they come down and they want what they want, and like, so you kind of don't want to be a tourist. And then there's like people who visit and like maybe are a bit nicer, and then there's people who own a home and they come down, and then there's people who have moved down and have lived there for a year or so, so you like, and then there's people who live there, and then there's the people who have been born on the island, and then there's people whose like grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents have shipwrecked on the island, and like those are the true locals and natives. So there's all these different hierarchies that exist, and like that's what's like super interesting to me, is the people who have lived there for generations, and like that's their home and that's their history, and like that's like literally some people shipwreck there. Like that's where they stayed and like made the best of it. And it's like that's those people's experiences versus the people who come down from Ohio for the views and the ocean. It's just these two different worlds kind of like bumping up into each other that I think is so interesting.
I agree. It is like absolutely fascinating. And I love so later when Charlotte and Evie are on the trip to the Dominican, Charlotte addresses it more specifically. And I love how Evie responds, like her voice, and it's so Evie, like she kind of she's like, well, that's not really right, but whatever, we'll just move through. And it just seemed like such an honest, I love how you like stir it up and then kind of walk away. And I love watching Evie get to be a tourist in Vegas and get to be a tourist there, and also live the other side of that life. Like you give her adventures, which I love. And hearing how you kind of built this book, my question about, any Evie adventures that were left on the cutting room floor is what I want to know. Like, what adventures did she have that we don't know about?
Yeah, I definitely wanted her to have adventures. I wanted her, is exactly like what you said. I wanted her to get off of Hatteras Island and see what it was like to be the tourist and to be the girl on the other side of that dynamic. So I wanted to take her different places, and I want to take her to Las Vegas because it's like about as polar opposite from Hatteras Island that I could possibly imagine. So I kind of wanted to see what she would do there. So I didn't really have any other travels or adventures that got left on the floor, although I did have initially in the second Las Vegas chapter, she met Mike Tyson and has shrimp with him and like tells him off and gets closure that way. But we ended up revising that because it was very different feel to it than the rest of the book. Surreal.
As I was reading it, it makes total sense that in one version she did meet him, because I was like, she's gonna find him. Like I was like, she's totally gonna find him. And I was like, Eve, what are you gonna do? Like, don't, but it made me read with a different kind of urgency that really lent itself to how drunk she was getting. Like that's so interesting that's what you were writing towards at one point, because I was ready.
I'm like, if anyone would have been able to find him on the strip, it would have been Evie. But she was getting progressively drunker and drunker, and then in the end, like it was the right move to make it. I wanted her to to have the realization come from herself and from within, that like maybe she's kind of done with this Mike Tyson business, and maybe it's not, all she's built it up to be in her own mind. So we wanted that to be her own realization and not coming from him. But yeah, initially it was a lot more surreal, and she does a cartwheel in front of him and falls into a canal. Remember me now?
I see it. I mean, I totally see it. I see it. It's happening. Well, and I've also never been to Vegas, so that was a fun romp for me as a reader as well.
Yeah, it's
but
an interesting place. It's weird.
Super weird. But let's talk about Charlotte, her friend throughout the book, and Charlotte appears and disappears, I think, in a very honest way, like a childhood friend does. In the book. I have a few questions, but first can you talk to Charlotte a little bit?
Yeah. It sort of was this idea of this friends that you make when you're a child, and then the relationship, because like a lot of friends that you make when you're a child, you sort of do outgrow, and it just happens. But sometimes there's the special friends that you stay friends, and you something connects you when you're this child, like something, in each of your spirits connects you. And then no matter what happens to you as you go forward in your different paths of life, that connection is still there. And so I wanted to play with that for a friendship story. And it was also had to be much more intentional between Evie and Charlotte because of their distance. Like, she doesn't live there on the island. She goes there on vacation, and that's when they meet, the summer that Evie is, living there in the campground with her aunt while her mom is off, figuring out her own stuff. So I wanted that friendship to be, really central to Evie's character and really central to her development. And I think about it sometimes, like how there are a lot of the story revolves around romantic relationships, but how I think the real love story is Evie and Charlotte. Like, they're the ones who go through all this stuff together, and they change so much, and their lives get into these drastically different places. And it's like at one point, on the Dominican Republic trip, do they stay friends? Is it just time? Have they outgrown each other, or do they break up, or do they, stay friends?
The answer is always C. The answer is
always C. You gotta stay friends. It's just a special relationship that I just wanted to have be part of her life. And sort of how the way Aunt Faye is always in Evie's corner, I wanted Charlotte to kind of always be there and be that person that's there for her.
Well, I love the way the friendship began, as you touched on it, with, they are going to have a ritual. They're going to save the world. The way little girl friendships, the specialness of that. And then Aunt Faye's like, all right.
Right.
Let's
do it.
Yep, I'm your Aunt Faye. Let's do it. Let's do it. And seeing Charlotte evolve, come in and out. But I love the way she supports, on that Vegas trip, the phone that almost reveals the trueness of their friendship all the way. Because Evie's on this drunken bender. So she's starting and coming up and coming down. And Charlotte's just like, all right, well, I'm grading papers. Well, do you really want to, what are you going to do when you see Mike Tyson? And, just really her unflinching support and honesty. And then the way she holds up a mirror to her friend in such a nice, interesting way. I absolutely love how you did that with Charlotte.
Good. Yeah. I think the female friendships is this untapped potential in literature that I would love to explore more. I just think they can be such powerful, important relationships in people's lives. And I think it's time to look at that instead of looking at women as, competitive or I don't know, not supporting one another. And there's so much rich material there, I think.
So much, but because your story is over time, it's a really interesting way to explore that dynamic, because it does evolve. There is that moment of, are we going to carry this into adulthood, because it's going to look different, and the decision to do so. And then when you are such friends over time, you have a separate history, but you also have a shared history.
Yeah.
And again, we were talking about something book clubs would really love to explore earlier, just in, bad and people's opinions. But I think also that would be a really interesting conversation to have around this book for a book club, is female friendships over time, and sharing what people have and talking about Charlotte and Evie. Now tell me about why it was important for her to have the unplanned pregnancy and drop out of college. Tell me how that became because it's while it happens and while it's just a part of her life, tell me about that, please.
Yeah. So I wanted Evie I wanted her to be on the cusp of leaving Hatteras, leaving her community, leaving in her mind, leaving her reputation behind, ready to go off and start afresh and like reinvent herself as a college girl, and then have to go back and in again, like in her mind, have fulfilled all these prophecies that she thinks the community has put upon her as this bad girl, and be like, okay, yep, it came true. And now she has to go back to that same community and deal with the repercussions, and rebuild herself from there. So in that way, that's how I wanted that to sort of all tie in together. So like she was, just about to, think that, the journey was over, and she's going to leave, and she's going to be someone different, and then have to go back to where you started from, and build yourself up from there.
Well, and it also allows you to explore family in a really interesting way, with her brother, and I think you also, that's throughout the book. This book is so different than any other book of its kind, which is why it's so special. But also it's this combination of Evie judging herself, but while at the same time, is she really being judged by others? And I don't think she's being judged by others, and in the way that she judges herself. And I love that thinking, and I love the inner dialogue. And we talked that you explore, and we talked a little bit about the quiz chapter, and definitely the funeral chapter, but you also have the Dear Abby chapter, which is a great deep dive into something else. Can you talk about why Dear Abby and just the structure of that chapter peppered through?
Yeah, so that chapter is postpartum, and that's when she's 19, and she has just had her baby, and everyone has left and gone back to school, and she's there in her little house on Hatteras Island alone with her son, for the first time. And as I knew that she was gonna, get pregnant and move back home. And I thought to myself, well, if that's not a recipe there for postpartum depression, I don't know what is. So like, that's gonna be something that we need to explore. So the structure of that one, like, the Dear Abby letters, I don't know how did I'm not sure how I stumbled across those. There's like,
part of what I enjoyed about it is the consistency of the newspaper that's coming every day, whether she's reading it or not reading it, and also the loneliness of it. But it served, as a little vignette, as the Dear Abby chapter, as I call it, but to really bring you into that feeling of every day, like the fact that it's in a newspaper, it's every day coming, the days are passing, like, she's stuck in this place as the days are passing. And it was like a beautifully structured way to give that feeling to the reader. Yeah. And with the Dear Abby punctuating into her actual mind. And then, you don't talk, for it being taking place on the island, you don't talk about the ocean all that much, except for at the end of that chapter. And I think that's I think that's a really special moment. And it allows the ocean to do what it can do sometime, to allow space for things. Can you talk about why the ocean why that's where it appeared, or why it didn't appear elsewhere
Mhm.
in certain
Yeah,
ways?
yeah, definitely. Like I was, as I was writing this, I was trying to like, I was really trying to get into the head of what it would be like to live there year round and have it um not be this place where you're focusing on the water and the beauty of the island and um the magic and the history, because it's just like the place where you live. And there I don't know, when we actually lived there, like there would be like weeks go by and you don't go through the ocean because you're just working and doing your thing and going to the grocery store, and you kind of like just becomes that place. So I wanted it to not be, I wanted to go up against that sort of descriptiveness, but at the same time it is this sort of force and beauty that is there in the background of her life and that she does love and appreciate, and that I wanted her at certain points in the novel to acknowledge and be like, oh yeah, this is, and have it play a part in, and have it yeah, be that meditative spot where you can sort of stop and think and get this sense of space and focus, and have it be yeah, this sort of special space that allows you to clear your head. And so I had her take Austin there, and I wanted that to be where they kind of had their first connection, and have that be the almost the beginning of their relationship, because in the very beginning, for the first few months of his life, like she's just in a really bad spot and she's not really connecting with him. She's like, really deep into herself there. So yeah, that's where I wanted them to start to connect. I wanted her to take Daniel there at some point and have that be part of their connection. And then showing, yeah, like I think there's one point where she's there with Nate and Jenny and all of them, and like I wanted it to be there too. So I did want it to write about it and bring it in at some points, but not.
It does pulse with all those relationships that matter. With Aunt Faye, there's one with Nate and Austin fishing.
Yeah, I love that.
It really pulses you
Mhm.
structurally in that way, and where it matters, where it's real in a really beautiful way.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
did. Oh no, I did want to weave it. I wanted to weave it in kind of consciously, and not just be like writing these long descriptive passages, which trust me, I have done before, like writing about it as not from the point of view of someone who lives there, but just like it's this beautiful evocative place. But I wanted to go against that in this.
it illustrates a lot, and I knew that was purposeful, but I'm so glad to ask you about that. I want to ask you a little bit about some of your other writing. When I gave your biography introduction to our friends here watching, you talks about some of your writing in different places it's been published, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what else you've worked on in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've published bits and pieces of this as stories, and then I have had this is my debut novel, so I don't have any books quite yet. So this is my debut. I have lots of essays, like nonfiction is kind of my runner up genre. I have plenty like essays that I've worked on and published throughout, and I think relatively
What are
recently.
they about? What are your essays about in
Yeah, for
general?
nonfiction.
Yeah.
So I've written a lot about chronic illness as nonfiction, and then more recently, more like parenthood-ish things. Sort of, I wrote an essay about car naps, and I wrote an essay about mostly more parenthood related. So that's mostly what I've tended to write about for nonfiction. A poem here and there, that is not, that's my third genre. I'm not talented at that.
Well,
Look at those.
but it's all about constantly writing, and this book is such a treat. So I'm wondering, as you're constantly writing, I know it took a long time for this to get to this moment in time, but do you see yourself continuing to revisit the Outer Banks, or do you see or where do
Mhm.
you see yourself writing in the future?
I do actually. I have so I have two projects big projects that are in mind. Small things come and go, but I have a revision. I have a book that I wrote from Charlotte's point of view, and it's Charlotte's story. And like, so I knew Evie. That's my like my drawer novel. It's been in a drawer for a long time because I needed to step away from it. Like I needed a lot of distance from it. And so yeah, I wrote that, and then I wrote this, and now I need to go back to that and see if I can polish it up and make it what it needs to be. So I do need to go back to that side of the story. And then I started something else. Like I think I have in my mind, I have a trilogy, like a Hatteras Island trilogy, that's going to come into shape. Like I started something new, which was a really nice feeling because I hadn't had brainstorms for a new big project for a long time. And sometime this spring, I had these ideas start to happen and stuff starting to come together that's working. And it's just a few pages right now, so I got to figure it out. But it's the next. I want it to be bigger and messier, and I want it to have Aunt Faye in it in the past, and I want Evie's mom, and I want trying to figure out if I can bring Charlotte back. I don't know. I feel like I can't leave her behind there, but
well, it's listening to you talk, and I'm like, when you're talking about Charlotte, I'm like, okay, I really want to meet Nate as a kid because he's so interested. Like he loves Nancy Drews. Like he's, what was it like to be Evie's big brother when she had the bad reputation? Like all of these questions, and then I love the wife that finally married. So, but I'm through Charlotte. That was where I was at, and I just cannot wait to learn how Aunt Faye became Aunt Faye and really just be so cool, and her mother's with the lighthouse mover. I mean, she's cool, even though that wasn't great decision making, or was it? Who knows? But there's so many questions, and that makes I cannot wait.
Yeah, her mom is fascinating to me. That since I've started writing her voice, and I started writing Evie's mom's voice when her mom was a kid, which was unplanned, but it started happening, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is something that I need to explore. And it's interesting because I want to look at, and I think there's a lot of stuff there that so I wanted Evie's mom to reconcile with her dad, but I didn't want to tell that whole story. And so what I want to get at now is how Evie's mom, because I think Evie's mom has all these layers built up around her, and it's this like sort of prickly exterior, and like what I'm writing now is figuring that out, like how these layers started building, because she doesn't start out that way. Right. So that's what I think is going to be really interesting. And then I think I think Evie's mom's mom and Aunt Faye have the history together. But so this is like what I really want to work on.
Oh, I'm so excited. And when they're at the campground and Evie's dad comes and sits, and Evie's asking him to tell the story about, you understand that they had a great love.
Yeah. And I think that love, I think she realizes that leaving it wasn't the solution, and like it is this great love, and it is worth going back to and working on, and whatever obstacles they were coming up against was something that she wanted to go back to. And so I didn't want to like, that wasn't part of this story really. It wasn't
right, of course,
but I wanted to have it happen that way, and I needed her mom to go back to her dad and have that be that unexpected sort of twist there, that she does make it work out, and they end up staying together.
Well, I think that even just this deep dive of a conversation that I hope everyone listening or watching in the future is enjoying as much as me is really a reference to how strong the voices are in your book, and how character driven it really is, and how unique your voice is. And to that end, and I want the woman asking this question is what makes Blair Blair. And I want to talk before I ask her, well, her question is, and then we'll close chatting about Blair, but what has the reaction been to your book from people in the Outer Banks?
Yeah, so people seem to think I got it right, which was my biggest concern. Like I didn't want to make up stuff about the setting and the location. I wanted to get it right. So I have gotten as far as I know, people have liked it and enjoyed it, and haven't told me stuff that I've gotten wrong. So, fingers crossed I got the details correct. But it's gotten a great reception, especially with the bookstores have really liked it down there and have been hugely supportive. So Buxton Village Books and Downtown Books and Manio have been like two of my biggest cheerleaders. And much love to them. Like they've been great. And so yeah, hopefully I got it right.
It makes me curious, next time I run into all of them, if we ever gather as bookstores again, wondering, okay, so the tourists who came in and you sold this to, did they come back in? And did you hear what they, like the people from Ohio thought about the book who
Right?
loved Outer Banks? Like, can't wait to ask that question of the booksellers. But I want to talk a little bit about Blair because, small presses are so essential, and people watching, we try to highlight especially North Carolina small presses, but the publishing that's happening there is super special, and North Carolina has fantastic small publishers, and Regal House, Press 53, Hub Cities in South Carolina, but that's great. But what Lynn's done with Blair, I think, is super interesting, and also is able to carry back this tradition of incredible Southern presses that were cornerstones of publishing for years. And it's helping to kind of decentralize things. But can you talk a little bit about, and just for those people who don't know, well, I mean, I was going to give a little bit of information about Blair, but I will probably mess it up. And since Lynn's watching, I don't want to do that. But can you talk about your experience working with Blair?
Yeah, I'd love to. Like I said, like from it's like Blair, John F. Blair has been on my radar for a long time because it was the Taffy publisher. And so I'd always read a bunch of stuff from them. It's always been like, I've always just loved Blair and Carolina Wren. Yeah, so Blair, and I also don't want to get this wrong, but their mission is to sort of serve underrepresented voices. So, women, people of color, and also the Southeast US. So I think, yeah, I agree. What they've done is it's so special, and I love their mission, and I love the books in their collection, and like working with them it's been wonderful. Like they've been so supportive, and we did it throughout early 2020. Like we were in the worst part of things right as we were editing and going through the process there, and it was an awful time because I had had things ready, set up. I was gonna like recruit people to watch my kids, and I was gonna sit down, I was gonna focus on my edits, and I was gonna write, and I was gonna not do anything else and have any distractions, and like that just all went to hell. But we were sort of in it together, and like we made it happen. And Robin and Lynn and Ariel and everyone at Blair has been just so helpful and so supportive, and I've always felt cared for as an author and as a human being also. And I felt like they've done so much to make the book itself better, and to put the book out there into the world, and to support me as a human being. I just feel very, very lucky and blessed to have had this experience for my debut.
What's that like as you now are pretty deep into the publicity process, which it doesn't matter how great of a book you write if nobody reads it.
Oh yeah.
And I think they've done a great job, and I think with some magazine support, and really have hired one of my favorite people as a publicist, has been doing a good job. But I'm wondering what it's like for you to see your debut novel splashed across, we have a little poster about it, we've been featuring it, but plastered across social media and publications. What does that feel like?
Yeah, it's wild. It's so wild, especially like in the very beginning, like seeing the arc, like the advanced release copy, like opening that and seeing that, like, something you can pick up with the cover, and the cover, oh my God, like the cover itself, it's so amazing. Like I'm still not over that. Like it's so perfect. Yeah, the cover is just crazy. But yeah, it's it's still super wild to see like the Our State magazine. Like I love Our State magazine. Like it's a North Carolina magazine, and you open it and like there's my book. Like, it's still sort of surreal. And I guess I've gotten used to it a little bit more. It's been a few months, but still, like every time, and even just walking into a bookstore and seeing the book there, it's just like it's
Well,
just
I look forward when you walk into our bookstore.
I can't wait.
A lot of fun. And for those of y'all watching, for those of you who have signed up and are watching this in the future, you will obviously get your link to this video, but please also share it, and please also, when you read this book and you love it, tell everybody about it, and continue this work of, great books for great people, I guess. It's like a tagline, but
Yeah.
I want to thank you, Heather, so much for writing this book and for having this chat with us. And Lynn appreciated my Blair comments in the chat, which I appreciate, but thank you to Blair. And I think it's those of you listening, check out some of the smaller presses and we can help you with that at the Country Bookshop. If you want to read writing that is innovative and different and super representative of the South in ways that showcase the talent that's here, call us at the Bookshop. We will set you up. And yeah, thank you so much. Oh, and buy the book, buy this book, buy all books from us. We've got you. I'm going to put this in the chat, and thank you guys so much. Heather, thank you.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.